How do you even start a video like this? To comprehend words that are able to describe what today means to me. After all, this can only be done once, and after that, it's gone. Apollo Justice. Part of the reason I even started talking about Atatani in the first place. So I'm faced with the question, whether I can actually explain why I like this game so much, why I think it's overhated till this day. I think this game is more hated than Justice for All, the crossover, or any other Atatani game. But why? What makes Apollo Justice so special? My biggest argument for this would naturally be the fact that Apollo Justice hate is historic. Apollo Justice's reception isn't something new. It wasn't Dual Destinies, it wasn't Spirit of Justice, it wasn't Investigations, and it wasn't the first Atatani game. All of those games had, and to an extent, still have an overwhelmingly positive reception, at least when they were first released. The mixed reception of these games will only grow months, and in other cases, years after the game was released. But that was never the case with Apollo Justice. Apollo Justice was universally regarded as a bad game ever since it was first released. Whether it be the articles, the interviews implying it, or just plain the fandom in general. The dislike towards Apollo Justice is historic. I was introduced to the Atatani series in 2008, and I can say with complete certainty that Apollo Justice, the game and the character, were treated like the black sheep of the franchise. Until this day, some of that stench still lingers on the game. For the longest time, Apollo Justice was the black sheep of the franchise, and to an extent, it still is. And a lot of that has to do with what we as a community hold dear in our hearts, the characters. And as a somewhat sequel to my Apollo Justice video, let's dive into the characters of Apollo Justice. Let's get this one out of the way. I've already talked about Emma in the video, so if you want to know my thoughts on Emma Skye, please watch this video. And I promise I'm going to make a video about Trucy. I know it seems really inappropriate given the day, but I promise I'll make it something worthwhile. So that leaves these three, and it's appropriate. They're even the characters that get the most development in the game. First thing first, I'm actually going to retract my statements about Clavius in the past, because I feel he's been somewhat misunderstood. Clavius is often looked at as too nice, and admittedly I did agree with this to a certain extent a few years ago. But upon replaying Apollo Justice, I realized I was actually wrong. Clavius doesn't throw his guitar at you or something, but that doesn't mean he's not a threat. Clavius shuts down arguments, he insults you and he talks down to you consistently. Outside the courtroom, Clavius doesn't really see you as an enemy. From him capturing the hearts of everyone around you, to him playing the air guitar in the courtroom, everything Clavius does just sort of screams show off. Anyone know Dolph Ziggler? Clavius Dolph Ziggler. He'll invite you to his concert just to show you how much cooler than you he is. He values the truth, but by no means is he gonna hand it to you on a silver platter, unless it's as clear as day. Clavius isn't some deluded prosecutor who prides himself on perfection or revenge. He just does his job. But his eyes are averted from the truth when he or someone he knows are personally involved in a case, and he loses his cool persona and becomes much more aggressive. Clavius' development in Apollo Justice was about him learning to not let his own emotions get in the way of the case, and his own pursuit of the truth. He finds it hard to pursue the truth when he's personally involved. This is made clear in Case 3 and Case 4. And I found that some people misunderstand the character of Clavius because of this. Every occasion where Clavius just plain given up and just been rendered helpless when someone he knew was involved with the case. In Case 3 it was his best friend, and in Case 4 it's his brother. So my stance on him has quite honestly changed through the years. Clavius is a fun character, and an interesting spin on prosecutors in Atatani. While his arc isn't anything mind-blowing, it's effective. It gets the job done and it fits well with the themes of the game. It's interesting. A big reason why some people dislike the game of Apollo Justice is because of the characters, the main cast serving as a replacement for the ones we're already familiar with. And I've never really taken issue with this, for obvious reasons. The game is about a new set of characters, therefore it should rightfully pave the way for them. I've heard complaints about how Maya or Edgeworth or Iris weren't in this game, after everything that happened to Phoenix, but what purpose would they serve in a story about succession, and moving on to a new generation? There's a perfectly reasonable explanation to why several of them wouldn't be there. Maya is the master of the Crane channeling technique. Her entire arc is about her not wanting to be a burden on Phoenix and the others. She constantly felt useless and therefore she vowed that she would take her training more seriously, as the master of the Crane village. Edgeworth is just established to be a busy man. He's a pretty big deal and he has his own business to attend to. I don't expect Edgeworth to spend all of his time worrying about Phoenix, especially 7 years after the incident. And last but not least, Iris, and I think with Iris comes a bigger issue. Most people who wanted to see Iris are generally one of two things. One, they shipped Phoenix and Iris and wanted them to be in a relationship after Trials and Tribulation. Or B, it was in a general sense, of disliking how Apollo Justice ruins Phoenix's happy ending in Trials and Tribulation. I agree that Phoenix's happy ending isn't so happy with the knowledge of what happens to him in Apollo Justice. This is naturally at the fault of forcing Phoenix into the game. However, I don't think that takes away from the game, nor the story that came before it. And I'll explain my reasoning. The thing I feel that needs to be understood is that it's better that we leave the past alone and let new characters grow and develop. Maya, Edgeworth, Iris, Gumshoe, Francisca, any of these trilogy characters, they serve no purpose in the story. I genuinely encourage people to stop holding on so hard to these past characters. And yeah, we all love them, and it makes sense, they're our favourite characters, and it's fine that you want to know what they're up to, but is it really necessary? And that's the main thing I'm sort of driving at, and for the most part it's pretty self-explanatory what they're doing. And considering they're referenced several times throughout the game, I don't think they've been forgotten. But I know what some people are thinking. What about the main character? Well, let's begin with the man himself, Apollo Justice. Like I said, for those who don't know, before Spirit of Justice, before Dual Destinies, Apollo was the butt monkey of this series. Practically no one liked him, and he was considered the bland Phoenix clone with very little personality and backstory. He was seen as an incompetent lawyer who couldn't do anything by himself. Naturally, to the surprise of no one, I don't agree with this, but this is genuinely what people were saying at the time, and in some cases, till this day. So let me address the term Phoenix clone. To be blunt, it's a generalized phrase with a very loose definition. Feel free to correct me on this one, but from what everyone I've talked to and seen, the commonly held belief is that the term Phoenix clone, referring to Apollo's inner monologue and his snarky comebacks and self-depreciation. He's a defense attorney, and that's it. Literally ask anyone, they'll never give you a clear-cut definition of what this loose term even means. And I've come to know this phrase as being the protagonist after Phoenix. Since most people going into Apollo Justice care more about Phoenix than they do the main protagonist, they see Apollo as a replacement. And he stands behind a defense bench, and that's literally all it is. The reason this argument doesn't have much basis to me is because it's so vague and it's never elaborated upon past the, oh, he's sarcastic and he does the same things as Phoenix. And I'm actually going to reference Shutakumi himself here. In a special interview, he stated the following. Shutakumi briefly talks about how the main protagonist in Ace Attorney is designed to be an avatar, made to relate to the player and how natural the dialogue is supposed to be. It's actually a really interesting read if you want to study more on how Shutakumi constructs some of his characters. I'll leave a link in the description below. Essentially what Shutakumi is saying here is that both Apollo and Phoenix are made to serve as avatars for the player. Everything they say needs to feel natural and similar to how the player would react in that situation. With the exception of maybe Edgeworth, every protagonist in Ace Attorney is fundamentally the same. Remove Apollo's bracelet, remove Athena's moon matrix and widget, get rid of all the tricks and gimmicks, and you'll find that fundamentally, all these characters are the same. For the most part, it just amounts to them being good-willed people and wanting to defend their clients to the best of their ability. There are minor differences, like Mia and Phoenix being more feisty and stubborn attorney, and Athena and Apollo being more prone to being taken off guard, but that's more due to experience than actual personality. There's very subtle differences with the characters, but it's nothing too major. The characters are designed to be relatable avatars for the player. Therefore, personality-wise, there isn't a whole lot to distinguish them from one another. There's subtle things like Apollo's nervousness and attempts at professionalism, or just how laid back the character of Phoenix Wright was, but was never anything too major. To provide an example, you won't see a protagonist in Ace Attorney tell the judge to shut up or something. That's something a character designed to represent you wouldn't do. Well, some of you anyway. With the exception of perhaps Edgeworth, all the main protagonists are fundamentally the same. And when you remove all the needless gimmicks and powers like hypersensitive hearing or flipping emotions on a dime, you'll find that personality-wise, they share many of the same similarities. What makes these characters different is their motivations and interactions or relationships with other characters. It's their role in the series and how they interact with others. That's what makes them unique and stand out. Phoenix treats Mia with utmost respect as a mentor. He treats Maya like a friend and he treats Paul as someone to look after. Apollo initially looked up to Phoenix in naivety, but shortly after he acts as both a straight man to Phoenix's parenting and both him and Trucy's crazy interactions as a group. Apollo is envious of Clavius and all the things he's done. On the other hand, Phoenix doesn't think much of Clavius at all. Instead, he just views him as some arrogant youth. Even Athena brings a new perspective in terms of interactions with the agency. He's the youngest, so she's the most inexperienced, so her interactions are more so her looking up to Phoenix and trying to catch up with Apollo. But notice how character interactions and motivations are what distinguish the main protagonists from one another, not buckets of backstory and pointless gimmicks. My point is, there's never really been a clear argument for why Apollo in Dual Destinies or Spirit of Justice differs from his personality in Apollo Justice. You must see what I mean here, because it's all left vague, so we all just kind of pass it off as second nature. I feel like the only reason people feel the difference is because we're looking at Apollo from two different perspectives for a majority of the game. But that's kind of a video for another day. In terms of motivational differences, to understand that, we need to understand the character of Phoenix Wright. Essentially, Phoenix's entire arc is about him learning what it means to defend someone. Phoenix goes from believing defending is all about defending your client to the bitter end, to learning that the truth is more valuable than defending your client, and mustering up the ability to expertly do this on his own, without the help of his friends or his mentor. He learns pursuing the truth is not only a way of saving your client, but in some cases, even the culprit. That's who Phoenix is. He's someone who pursues the truth in order to save all parties involved. Now, in the context of Apollo Justice, Apollo is a character who's motivated by the state of the legal system and his desire to change it, so criminals can't manipulate it to their advantage. Later games would forget this entirely and change his motivations and backstory on a dime. So yeah, Apollo and Phoenix are two different characters who bring something new and unique to the table in terms of character interactions and motivation. When you understand what the essence of being a protagonist in Ace Attorney is, then you'll understand why they're all made to be as relatable as they are, what makes them stand out and what makes them different. So yeah, Apollo and Phoenix are different characters who bring something unique to the table in terms of character interactions and motivations. So up next would be the legend himself, Phoenix Wright. This one's a bit of a dicey one, because people don't really like how Phoenix is portrayed in this game. So let me see if I can try throw my bone in. I would argue that Phoenix is great in Apollo Justice, and I'm going to try to explain this in the most clear and concise way possible. I already explained prior who Phoenix Wright is and what his motivations are. To generalize them for the sake of time, it's to find the truth and save all those involved. Now, to understand why Hobo Phoenix is the way he is, we need to go back to Phoenix's last trial. I brought this up in my Founder Impressions video, but I think this trial is completely in character for Phoenix and works well with his development in Trials and Tribulations. He's a competent attorney who can stand on his own 2 feet. He doesn't need Mia, Maya, or Edgeworth to help him now. He can pursue the truth on his own, and I've genuinely heard people take issue with how confident and calm Phoenix is in this case, and that's not an issue. I can't stress enough that this is the mature Phoenix Wright. He isn't gonna run home screaming over Clavius. He doesn't use any of these sprites, and it's for good reason. Clavius is just some arrogant new prosecutor who's talking down to Phoenix for no good reason. History has shown us that whenever prosecutors look down on Phoenix, he's going to pull this face. It's nothing new. It's the satisfaction of proving a smug prosecutor wrong. Phoenix doesn't even overreact when he loses his badge. He instead accepts the fact that what he's done can't be fixed. Because not only has he matured, but he understands the severity of his actions. The purpose of this case and scene is that it's a tragedy that affects the character, and causes them to question the way they look at something, and in this case, it's the legal system. Experiences can change people. I can't stress this enough, but backstory shouldn't be needless exposition. It should give us enlightenment on why a character is the way they are, and have an effect on the story being told. Needless to say, I don't think later games do this well. I hinted at this in my Emma Sky video, but it's only through this tragedy occurring that Phoenix became what he did. Phoenix's last words in the court aren't a howling scream or him grabbing his head in despair. It's him finally questioning the integrity of the legal system he once trusted. It's an experience that changed him and developed him as a character, in learning the limitations of the legal system and why it needed to be changed. There's this big misconception that Phoenix was simply seeking revenge in an attempt to catch Kristoff, but Phoenix says it himself, plain as day in case 1. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Phoenix in this game. Phoenix is quite misunderstood in this game, and it's actually kind of saddening. Kristoff explicitly asks him on 2 occasions why he's still prying on, why he still cares about finding out what happened in the past. If Phoenix was simply seeking revenge, he would have stopped after case 1. He has nothing to gain after that point, because Kristoff's already in jail, but he did it. And at this point, you should know why. Because of what we already know about Phoenix as a character in the trilogy and his development through the course of Apollo Justice. Phoenix values the truth above everything, but now he has a new incentive, the state of the legal system. To imply Phoenix doesn't hold any form of resentment towards Kristoff would probably be a lie. But to oversimplify his motivation to simply revenge would be an even greater one. Phoenix was naturally sad that his badge was gone. This was acknowledged several times during the investigation, but he doesn't let that get in the way of his pursuit of the truth. It's consistent with what we know about his character and what's most important to him. The reason Phoenix changes in Apollo Justice isn't because he's out of character, it's because he's grown past just being a relatable avatar for the player. And to be blunt, I think it's the main reason people feel so disconnected from him. He's moved past that state of being the player's avatar, and now he feels completely like his own character. So what has changed? Well, Phoenix has acquired an ends justify the means mindset. He understands that evidence alone won't be enough to catch some killers, namely Kristoff or Darian. I went through this in my Apollo Justice plot hole video, but essentially Phoenix's new methods are tricking or trapping the killer. To quote Phoenix again, it's about igniting the killer's flame. He did something very similar in Recipe for the Turnabout, with Furio Tigre. When evidence isn't enough, you need to trick the killer. Because the legal system is so flawed that even when all the facts point to one possibility, without any evidence, it means nothing. This isn't anything new to the series, but it's finally being addressed in this game, because the characters are becoming self-aware. Phoenix does everything he does in Apollo Justice for the sake of finding the truth and saving the legal system. If Phoenix didn't have the forgery, then Kristoff wouldn't have said something he shouldn't have. If Apollo didn't ignite Darian's flame, then he wouldn't have caught him to begin with. And if the legal system just plain didn't change, then Kristoff just plain wouldn't have been caught in general. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything either. There's a moral grey area on what Phoenix is doing. While he has good intentions, his methods to reaching the truth are questionable. Phoenix isn't a beacon of morality, nor is he a flawless character. But it's these flaws that make him compelling and interesting. It would be boring to see Phoenix portrayed as this godlike figure with barely any flaws. And it wasn't forced either, because all Phoenix's actions are justified through the explanations given in the game for his actions. Phoenix is the same man he was all those years ago. He's just grown, matured and learnt something from his tragedy. He changed the way he looked at the legal system and what methods he would use. But he is still Phoenix. His goals, desires and motivations remain the same. He cares about the legal system, he cares about pursuing the truth, and he cares about the people closest to him. He could have easily just let Miss Orley be accused of murder in case 1, but he's the one to object because that's not the truth. He could have easily just left Kristoff in his prison cell in case 4, but the truth of the past wouldn't have been found and Vera wouldn't have been saved. Phoenix isn't going to hold a grudge against a little girl. There's two scenes that always get me in Apollo Justice, and I've never heard anyone say they teared up or it tugged their heartstrings. In the Mason system, there's two scenes in the park where Phoenix is talking to a young Trucy Wright and a young Vera Mission, and he's standing before the two people that essentially ruined his life. And there's a point where he himself starts to tear up a little. And both characters take notice of this and start to blame themselves. And Phoenix quickly adjusts himself and reassures them, telling Trucy that he wouldn't leave her and telling Vera it wasn't her fault. Being able to put his own emotions to one side for the sake of staying strong for someone who needs it. It's a brief but touching scene. It reinforces the change Phoenix underwent and the sacrifices he made to find the truth for 7 years. Oh, and to briefly address the whole Phoenix is a dick to Apollo argument, it's once again really exaggerated and misunderstood. Phoenix is just teasing Apollo. It surprises me how everyone takes this stuff seriously when it isn't even new to the character of Phoenix. He's had very similar interactions with Maya and Edgeworth, and he's been established to be a very laid-back character. And then there's the whole Phoenix uses Apollo thing, which while I believe there is some truth to, it's such an oversimplification of their relationship. Phoenix establishes that he does have faith in Apollo and his ability. He made it clear in the game that he cares for both him and Trucy. And you know what's really interesting about this? There's a new fan favorite character that I'm not going to say the name of. So this new character shows up after being gone for a decade, uses Apollo for his revolution, and almost gets him killed in the process 3 times. Bring up the forgery all you want, but Phoenix at least takes the blame for it, when there's a strong implication that he didn't even do it. So I'm someone that likes to believe that Phoenix forged his evidence, and it supports my argument concerning Phoenix's morally grey methods. But something I always found interesting is similar to his final trial, Phoenix would never have the time to forge that evidence, but he was accused of doing so by Kristoff and Apollo, with good reason. But something I love about Thunderbird Trump is all the parallels to Phoenix's final trial. And this is another one. Phoenix was arrested, so he would have no time to forge that evidence. So out of curiosity, and this is a genuine question, who do you think did it? Who lost a father in a similar circumstance and doesn't want to lose them again? Who would stereotypically have access to things like cards at their leisure? Who was the one that gave the evidence before in the first place? This is all implication though. There's no line in the game that actually proves this explicitly. It's more so just heavily implied. Even when Apollo eventually asks Phoenix if he did it, he doesn't actually provide a straight answer. And interestingly, he responds in the exact same way as he did when he was accused of the forgery the first time. Would it even matter? The first time when referring to the legal system, and the second time when referring to the fact that he's just plain not an attorney anymore. He never does answer your question. But that's just something to think about, really. I don't really have any direct proof of that outside implication, so don't hold me to that. And I'm perfectly fine with assuming that Phoenix did forge that evidence. Hobo Phoenix is a great character, and I'm sad to see him go. Apollo Justice was a really good protagonist, and I'm sad to see him never reach his full potential. I think the reason these characters worked so well for me was that Apollo's unique character interactions and relationships, providing a different take on Ace Attorney we hadn't seen before. He had different goals and motivations to Phoenix from the trilogy, while remaining a strong avatar for the player, keeping his dialogue natural. And the very fact that he's familiar with several of Phoenix's cases beforehand, proves that he was still designed with the idea of being the player's avatar. In many ways, Apollo represents someone who's played the entire trilogy, from the naive belief of Phoenix Wright, to punching him in the face for using forged evidence, to thinking less of him because of it, and his constant curiosity to how Phoenix lost his badge in the first place and why he has a daughter. Hobo Phoenix is an interesting exploration into a character we're familiar with from a third-person perspective. I view him as a compelling character because of how his experiences changed who he was and how he viewed the legal system. Clavius works as an egocentric prosecutor who finds himself misguided from what's most important to him when he's personally involved. I like Clavius, he's one of my favourite prosecutors, and it's no secret that I love Apollo Justice. I don't think it's the best Ace Attorney game, but it's certainly one of my favourites. It's a big part of the reason I put a hold on animations, because I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to talk about what I do and don't love about the series. And sometimes I feel like we get too held up in a general consensus that we forget to question things. Like back in the day, someone would say something like, forcing Phoenix into Apollo Justice ruined the game. But then the same person would turn their back and say, gee, I'm so glad Phoenix and Maya are back. And no one would laugh. We'd all just kind of shrug it off like second nature. At the time, I felt like no one would question that. No one. And it's honestly weird how times change. I'm well aware of how passionate the Ace Attorney community is. I make these videos because I want to talk about things I don't feel like everyone's addressing or talking about. It's been 10 years. 10 years. Until this day, I still don't think Apollo Justice's pulverizing reputation has faded. It's almost kind of saddening. The negative blowback from Apollo Justice ultimately led to the next game playing it safe. And when I look at Apollo Justice, I sort of just think, missed opportunity. There was so much to explore, brand new characters and ideas. There was potential here. Is there something that disheartens me more than anything? It's wasted potential. I can spend all day talking about what could have been, the mights and the maybes, but I'll never know. When I originally planned to review Apollo Justice, it was intended for my last Ace Attorney video. In a way, it was going to be a party gift, but I realized there's so many other things I want to talk about. So many other things that I want to address in terms of Ace Attorney. And I don't regret deciding not to stop. Apollo Justice is a game that holds up exceptionally well, especially considering my stance on the main series right now. To quote True Takumi, it's a combination of both past and future. To me, it's always been about succession and moving on. And if you haven't physically played it yet, I suggest you amend that. It's a game that I feel like every Ace Attorney fan needs to play. I'm not sure if my thoughts on these characters have necessarily changed your stance on them, but if I've at least made you think about why you think what you do, then I'm perfectly fine with that. I love Ace Attorney and I always will. I continued on with my Ace Attorney channel because I wanted to promote discussion in the Ace Attorney community and talk about things that people weren't always talking about. This isn't about disagreeing with the community for the sake of disagreeing. The general consensus behind Case Freeze is that they're the weakest, and besides DGS, I agree with that. The general consensus behind Spirit of Justice is that it's great for Apollo's character, and I disagree with that. My point is, no one can be pinned down to set beliefs. We all have our own stances on the series, the games, and the characters. And I encourage discussion because it can bear our knowledge of the series. Do you think Apollo Justice's characters are misunderstood? Do you think they hold up in hindsight? So a decade into the future, do you think Apollo Justice's hate was overblown? Or was it justified? Leave a comment below stating what you think. I'm curious. You might have watched this video and learned something, but in the same token, maybe you didn't. Regardless, I'm just one guy. Just like anyone else in the comment section. Feel free, be open to discuss, and be open to new ideas. And again, I'm not trying to make people think like me. I'm just trying to make people think, like, in general. With that said, thank you guys for watching, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I'm the Storyteller and I'll see you around.
Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician and drink his remedy in silence and tranquility.